So next we are going to hear from Nicholas Jones and Michael Bentley on an update of the 2015 NCT National Census Test Report.
Good morning. Thank you, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. Mike and I are fresh off the plane. We're excited to be here today and talk with all of you about the 2015 National Content Test, the research, and to hear your feedback and your thoughts. And we'd like to really just have a proactive discussion. We know we had a virtual meeting earlier this spring where we went through a lot of this already. But for those who are new and just to give everyone a refresher, we're going to go through some of the slides. I think with the dialogue at any point, if you have questions or comments, we have a lot of time dedicated this morning to talk about all of this, so we would not mind any interruptions or questions as we go through the report this morning. You've had a chance to look at the 2015 National Content Test Race and Ethnicity Report. The analysis report was released on February 28th. For those in the audience and online, it's available on the Census Bureau website at census.gov/2020census, and you can find it there listed under the 2020 Census Memorandum Series. Mike and I also had a great opportunity to film a video that has really helped data users and stakeholders and advisors to understand the findings. It's a nice piece, about 40 minutes long, that hopefully many of you have already been able to watch and to get a thorough introduction to the NCT report. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that. The website is also listed at the bottom of the slide for those who are online. So as a reminder, the goals from the 2015 National Content Test on race and ethnicity were exploring key dimensions, the dimension of question format, looking at the separate questions design versus the combined question design, testing a new category for respondents of Middle Eastern and North African heritage, and also exploring the ways in which we formulate the questions themselves with the wording that we use and the terminology that's included conceptually. With the 2020 census looking to move more towards an online response, we also took the opportunity in preparations for this 2020 census to test new different versions on different formats, optimizing the designs, particularly to collect detailed race and ethnicity responses. So first, we're going to go through the findings for exploring question format for race and ethnicity. You can see here on the slide, we have the three conceptual depictions of the question formats that we tested. Blue, red, and green. The blue refers to the two separate questions approach, and this is linked to the types of graphics that we're going to walk through. Red refers to what we think of as the streamlined version of a combined question where every major group had a checkbox, examples, and a detailed write-in line. This is most similar to what we tested in the 2010 Alternative Questionnaire Experiment research. And then on the far right, due to great feedback from advisors and stakeholders over the last several years, since we've been talking about the 2010 results, we were able to test a version that includes multiple detailed checkboxes across groups, as well as a write-in line. And this is a combined question approach that we refer to as the combined question with detailed checkboxes. So blue, red, and green. This first graphic looks at the distributions by question format, and the major takeaways here are that across the question formats, we found that the blue version, the two separate questions, yielded higher reporting of some other race, and that was much lower when we used a combined question, either in red or green. We also found, and not surprisingly, both of these results back up what we learned before from our 2010 research, that the level of reporting white reflects in the combined questions what we see traditionally with the crosstab of race and Hispanic origin as the non-Hispanic white population. All the other distributions were essentially the same. Taking a closer look at this, we here conceptually compare the non-Hispanic and the Hispanic reporting patterns, including different groups for Hispanic responses. And here on the left-hand side, you can see that the combined question approach more easily allows Hispanics to self-identify their Hispanic identity. What this tells us in a nutshell is that when Hispanics are simply trying to report they're Hispanic, when they do it in the separate questions, that's coded as some other race, so you can see the blue bars in the center. That person tried to tell us they were Hispanic only, but by saying Hispanic to the separate question and saying Hispanic to the race question, they became two things, Hispanic and some other race. The blue bar on the other side shows that these Hispanics were reporting Hispanic and another race group, most often Hispanic and white, and again, that was less so with the combined question approach. The distributions of other categories have similar levels of reporting regardless of question format. Again, this is consistent with our previous findings. Another piece of analysis that we went really in depth to for the 2015 NCT was to look at the ways in which Hispanic respondents were reporting their, quote, race. Here, what we see from the findings is that, again, many Hispanics are simply trying to report they're Hispanic alone. You can see in the combined question that's upwards of 70% for both approaches, red and green. When you look at the reporting of Hispanics to race in the separate question, the blue bars again show us that many Hispanics, 40%, are trying to report that they're Hispanic only, but they're coded as some other race in the separate questions. And many Hispanics who are also reporting Hispanic and white or Hispanic and Asian, et cetera, are there in the second blue bar, again about 40%, who've reported in the separate questions approach. Based on a lot of interest from the 2010 research, we also thoroughly looked at the reporting of Black and Latino, and we found, regardless of question format, Hispanics who are identifying as both Afro-Latino or Hispanic and Black are doing so at similar levels, regardless of question format, separate or combined. And other distributions were similar for Hispanic race reporting. The last thing we look at here in the section of detailed reporting, in terms of question format reporting, is the levels of detailed reporting across groups. The major takeaway is that detailed reporting was the same or higher across all of the major categories for the reporting of the combined question with detailed checkboxes format, the green bar. This was true for Hispanics, it was true for Asians, and it was also true for other groups, including Pacific Islanders and American Indians, Alaska Natives. One thing that we notice here is that there's substantially different levels of reporting of detail using the combined question with detailed checkboxes when you look at that versus the separate questions for the white population and also for the Black or African American population. So these takeaways really show us that regardless of the different types of formats that we're asking, we're able to get better and more consistent data using this green version. And we have a few slides here that we presented during the virtual meeting. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are meant to be reference points if we have different questions or thoughts about the ways in which Hispanics using a combined question have 6 detailed checkboxes to use. New checkboxes, for example, for Dominican and Salvadoran and Colombian, and how that relates to the OMB definitions, collecting all of this diversity within the category, and as well as how did that relate to the ways in which we might provide tabulations for different national origin groups in 2020. Similarly, as we discussed in the virtual meeting, this is true for Asian responses. We're collecting detail using these approaches and finding that we're getting higher levels of detailed reporting. Again, following the OMB definitions and using 6 categories to represent the broad diversity of the Asian population, we're then able to tabulate detailed Asian national origin responses. This is also true with the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population, again, an area where we have now been able to utilize 3 new checkboxes for Pacific Islanders, Tongan, Fijian, and Marshallese, as well as write-in lines to capture the broad diversity of that population, and again, to provide tabulations for myriad detail groups within the population. With the American Indian and Alaska Native population, we talked about this a bit during the virtual meeting earlier this spring. And we had a version on the 2015 NCT for paper that included a dedicated write-in line, as there always has been for AIN, but also 3 conceptual checkboxes for American Indian, for Alaska Native, and Central South American Indian. We found that that approach, along with the approach in which we tested online with 3 different conceptual write-in areas, showed us a lot of things that we could learn about how to improve detailed reporting for American Indians and Alaska Natives. So in the 2015 NCT, compared with what we're now testing in the field in the 2017 census test for paper, we're planning to recommend that there's a better version of collecting detail using the write-in line approach with examples rather than the approach that you see on the right that used conceptual checkboxes. Again, we're collecting data for hundreds and hundreds of detailed American Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages and indigenous groups, and this is going to allow us to, encompassing the definitions of AIN from the federal standards, provide detailed responses for AIN groups. These are just meant to illustrate a few of those responses that we collect and tabulate among the hundreds of different detailed AI and AN responses for 2020. Turning closely to groups that have never had detail collected and tabulated for the white population or the black population, we can see also that we're using an approach on paper and on the internet with detailed checkboxes as an optimal design for collecting responses such as African American or Jamaican or Haitian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, Somali, etc. And those definitions, again, with the OMB yield us different detailed reporting levels than we have in the past gotten through just the separate questions approach with a checkbox or even separate questions with just a write-in. This will enable us to produce detailed reporting for groups such as Kenyan, Liberian, Senegalese, etc. And similarly with the white population, using an approach on paper and online with detailed checkboxes, we're able to find that these detailed checkboxes have yielded higher levels of detailed reporting, using checkboxes such as Irish and Polish, English and French, German and Italian, again following that OMB definition and yielding detailed responses for the first time. I want to spend a little bit of time focusing more closely here on the new category that we tested, which is the Middle Eastern North African category. We found that using both the approach with detailed checkboxes, again, yielded higher levels of detailed reporting for MENA respondents, both online and in paper. We can see that for the 2015 NCT, we tested 6 new detailed checkbox groups, as well as a write-in line. That version that we tested in the 2015 NCT proved to be very successful, but we've also done more research and outreach with MENA community leaders and stakeholders and advisors. And what we've recommended to go forward with in our 2017 census test is a version that also uses 6 detailed checkboxes and a write-in, but encompassing the definition of the Middle East and North Africa more broadly. We've introduced examples for Israeli and also a new example for Kurdish to help to illustrate that these are broad, diverse representations of the Middle Eastern and North African community, again, reflecting the OMB definition. Finally, we also have, for 2 decades now, collected detailed responses, and we're able to do so again as we plan for 2020. These are just some of the examples in the ways in which respondents can report that there are multiple origins in terms of things like white and black, or white and Asian in this case in the first scenario. The respondent can mark off different boxes. Those data would yield to different levels of tabulation that reflect all of the identities that the respondent has reported. So these are just a few of the examples in which respondents can self-identify with multiple groups, and that yields multiple tabulations in terms of those identities that they reported. The summary of our question format research is that the combined question with detailed checkboxes approach yields higher quality data on race and ethnicity, and this is again following up on what we learned from the 2010 AQE. We didn't find changes in the distributions for major race ethnicity groups. We found that there was decreased some of the race reporting using the combined question. We got lower item non-response, and the same or higher levels of detailed reporting, particularly with using this multiple detailed checkboxes approach. We also found higher consistency of reporting for Hispanic respondents using the combined question. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions that you wanted to go over regarding the findings for question format before we move on to MENA. We can continue to talk about this today, but just before we get into the details for MENA, I wanted to see if there's anything that you'd like to cover or talk about. Arturo or Nancy, I'll go back to you and Ditas.
Thank you, Nicholas. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on the Hispanic responses under the combined question with the check boxes and the green box? For the Hispanic respondents, if you could elaborate a little bit more on how many Latinos are responding as Latino only without identifying a racial category at all, knowing that in the previous format, the 2-question format, about 40% of Latinos identify themselves as some other race, and you said that dramatically declined, but what is the percent of Latinos who are still reporting a race, and how many are just reporting Hispanic?
Sorry, we're going to turn here to the slide that shows the percent distribution of race reporting for Hispanic respondents by question format. So again, we're looking here at the separate questions approach that are shown in blue, the combined with detailed write-ins, which is in the center shown in red, and then on the right side of each bar series in green, we have the combined with detailed checkboxes. So go back to the beginning here and focus on Hispanics who only reported as Hispanic. We found that about 70% of Hispanics were doing so in the combined question approaches, both the red and the green. They're telling us that they're Latino, that they're Hispanic, that they're Colombian, that they're Peruvian. All of those responses are included here. They didn't report any other groups. But when we look at the distributions compared to what's happening.
Where are the other 30%?
So the other 30% are reporting multiple groups, such as, and in this case, 2 or more means, in addition to Hispanic, they also reported 2 other groups, such as white and black, or black and American Indian, or Asian and Pacific Islander. About 2.5% of Latinos, regardless of question format, also identified as black or African American. And then in addition, you have about 15 to 20% of Latinos who on the combined question also reported white. That's on the left-hand side. And then smaller proportions reporting as Asian or American Indian, Alaskan Native, MENA, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, as you can see here. So among the reporting patterns, and this is something else, we don't have the slide here, but Mike, we could talk a little bit about the consistency. We've shown that previously, that in the combined question, we were getting more consistent reporting of race and ethnicity for Latinos. So then when we go back in the re-interview and we ask the Latino population, how do you self-identify? We ask an open-ended question. We then follow up with dichotomous questions about yes or no, are you white, are you black, are you Hispanic, Asian, et cetera. We got more consistent reporting for those responses in the re-interview using this combined question approach. So what this reflects really is that these are the ways in which Latinos are self-identifying. Most, 70%, are identifying as Latino only, but among those who also self-identify as Latino and black, or Latino and white, or Latino and Asian, their responses were more consistent than they were when that information was reported in the separate question.
Can I just piggyback on that? So that's okay, so 70% just Latino, and then about 20% white and 2.5 black. So do you have 8? Is there anyone doing other anymore? Was it still less than 1% like the AQE? And then what would the percentage be for American Indian? Because we're still missing about 8% there. So I'm just wondering where, like Arturo was saying, where the rest of those folks are.
Yeah, so with the combined question, Hispanic and Latinos generally aren't using the sum of the race field, and it just becomes a very residual category at that point. Things such as Brazilian, for instance, would fall into the sum of the race. Other groups such as American Indian or Asian tend to be pretty low with the Hispanic or Latino population. I don't have the exact number, but about 1% or less.
Gilberto and then Charles.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. This is something that is very close to my heart because, I always think of this 2.5% of Latinos identifying as blacks. Many Latinos who look like me still have problems, identifying as black. So a lot of them may be still in some of the race category. And that's why I believe it is important to reach out to communities and show them that they are included. Therefore, they can feel this, possibility at least to self-identify. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that direction to make sure that we get an accurate counting. And also the other thing I want to look at is the situation with other regions, black people from other regions, how are they self-identifying, to make sure that the black community in this country is counted, in a more realistic way. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Gilberto. I want to also follow up and say that as we prepare for 2020 and when we have decisions made later this year following the OMB guidance, whatever approach is moving forward for the 2020 census, there's going to be a lot of outreach and effort with communities and leaders to talk about these are the questions that we have. These are the options that people have to self-identify. The Census Bureau is not going to be able to tell you how to answer the question, but communities are going to be able to talk among themselves and with others to say, when we do identify this way, this is what happens in terms of data results. So reporting as Afro-Latino will then result in data for Afro-Latino identities. Identifying as white and Latino or Asian and Pacific Islander will yield those types of results. And so that's going to be an important part of our build-up for 2020 to make sure people understand what opportunities they have to self-identify and also how that then turns into data to reflect all of our identities. So thanks for your comment.
I'm wondering if you've done any more analysis with respect to this and kids that some of the Afro-Latino or the white Latino could be from households where the identification of the mother is Latino and the father is African, and how much this differs when you look at kids in those households, or how much that contributes to the determination of Latino or Hispanic, but also another race.
So similarly to what Gilberto was saying, these are things that really reflect the ways in which we have complex identities and complex heritages, households that are complex. Those are conversations that are often taking place in those households. When you see something like a school form or a health form or a census form. And we've done research with focus groups. We did focus groups in 2010 with parents of interracial families, multiracial children, and talk with them about how they're answering these forms. What we found in this research is that using instructions that take away the mark one or more boxes approach with a visual X and use the mark all that apply approach and note that you can report more than one group, that yielded higher reporting of multiple groups. And so we saw that as an effective way in the designs to make sure that people are understanding that they had the opportunity to report both. Again, it's the respondent and the families that are determining how they're self-identifying, but we're making sure that they have the understanding that this is an option to report multiple responses.
But I was wondering, from what you found in this, really around the kind of the statistical question, that we're not asking the 5-year-old how they identify. We're asking the parent or the person to say how they identify. And if it's in a mixed race family, they may be more likely to identify that child as a combination of the two parents in two, even though they are not listing themselves in that way. Although they may have been from a mixed race as well. But I mean, that's what I was wondering, because my sense is if you looked at just the adults and not the kids, that the 70% might be even higher as far as the Hispanic Latino.
That's certainly possible, and it sounds like it's in line with things of what we've seen before in our research and our explorations, that age does have an impact on self-identification. You know, if someone has been reporting the same way consistently when single race responses were asked up until 2000, they may continue to be reporting that way. But for children and for younger adults, it could be very different. And I think that's what you see in the results from the 2000
I guess I would be
and
interested in
2010
seeing
census.
this as far as the same table, but one with people over the age of 18 and another with people, say 0 to 17, and then even the 0 to 10 population.
So what I was pointing out is that in 2000 and 2010, we saw those types of patterns. Looking at children or younger populations, they're much more likely to be multiracial than our older populations, and we've done some of that work with our analysis of the multiracial population in 2000 and 2010. So I think that echoes your point, Charles.
So I just want to make a comment that in 2010, I guess my daughter was 7, and even though I'm very involved in this, I had and she's half Filipino, half Italian. And I put her down as just Filipino because I was like, wow, is it going to, even though I know, is it going to water down? But it was sort of, do people understand when you check those multiple boxes, how does it affect in the back end? And I don't know if we have an easy way to, to explain, oh, it's tabulated this and this and this. But in California, I wanted her Filipino to be, counted. So, I mean, it's just something to, to think about as we think about how we're identifying kids and people going, well, how are they going to use this data to reapportion or redistrict or what have you, So
Ditas, just to that point, we definitely talk about in our tabulations these different concepts of a lone and a loner in combination. We talk about how the Census Bureau, in collecting all that data, provides those tabulations back and not just one perspective. So someone who's reporting both Filipino and Italian would be tabulated as both Filipino and Italian. They'd have an alone or in combination count for the white population, as well as an alone or in combination count for the Asian population. And then they'd have a count and a tabulation for white and Asian. And so all of that data is there. It's especially important, we've talked about this before, for the American Indian Alaska Native population and for Pacific Islanders, where half of that population essentially is reporting multiple groups. And this is a concept that we've been working with for the last 2 decades, and we're seeing increasingly so that we're reflecting more multiracial identities in our country, especially for the younger population.
Wanted to also express my appreciation to Nicholas and Mike and Roberto and others who have been very engaging with stakeholders since the release of the NCT results. And some of the questions that I had asked about the sample size and the respondents, just reminding you, still eager to learn that. You don't have to provide me the data right now, but if you're able to, I think that's important for us in order to make a final endorsement or not of this.
Yeah. Thanks for that follow-up, Arturo, and we've been happy to engage with you on that. We have some numbers and some additional tabulations that we've ran. We're just looking at, for instance, much more detailed groups. In Table 14 in the report, if you've been able to look at the report, I believe it's on page 54-ish. We look at detailed reporting for each group by the different question formats, but we only show the details for the top six, the 6 largest groups, and we're able to run it beyond the top 6 to look at for the even smaller detailed groups. We're just finishing up quality assurance of those numbers now and trying to get some of that cleared to be able to show you a little more detail.
As we speak, OMB is still collecting comments on these issues to make a decision. What if they decide not to go with the recommendation of the combined question? Will the Bureau continue and collect that information? And if it does, will it make it to the tabulation and accounting at the end?
So to answer your question, I saw online you guys had a great discussion with Nancy Potok yesterday with the chief statistician, and she had a really good dialogue about where things are in the process. Yes, comments are still being collected. Comments are being received and posted online as they come in. Hundreds are coming in every day. The deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, April 30th, so there's still time for comments to be submitted. And those comments, if you're curious, I think Nancy also mentioned this, you can see them as they're posted each day. And so you get a sense of the types of comments that are coming in and the feedback. The decisions that OMB will make later this year are really going to be dependent on the type of analysis that's been done, the feedback that's come in from communities across the country and from individuals to reflect on question format, a MENA category, terminology, and examples. But we're waiting to see how that all comes to fruition in terms of how the Census Bureau will then move forward. We have goals of collecting and providing the most detailed and the most accurate data for our population. We've seen that through this research, optimal designs, like we've talked about today, include a combined question with detailed checkboxes. So that approach moving forward is how we'll be able, if it moves forward, to collect those details, but also with the approaches that we've tested as well, we do collect and provide detailed information through the separate questions. It's just shown in these research results that we may not get as high of a level of detailed reporting for some categories. So again, that's why we've said that the optimal design is the one which includes those detailed checkboxes.
Nicholas, thanks for your presentation. I have one question around the AI-AN responses.
Okay.
Could you tell me, for those that check the AI-AN box, how many actually provide the detailed write-in data without follow-up?
Without follow-up?
Without any follow-up. So in their initial responding, and they check the AI-AN box, how many actually provide the detail voluntarily without some follow-up?
What do you mean in terms of follow-up, just to be
I'm
clear?
assuming that Census is doing follow-up on the re-interviews or that sort of thing. Are you doing any of that?
So just to be 100% clear, in the national content test, there wasn't any non-response follow-up
Right,
for non-response, and we did have a re-interview for a subsample of respondents,
Okay.
but that was not to necessarily follow up per se on specific answers that they originally provided, but to collect more detailed information on race and ethnicity to understand which designs were the most accurate. So in the sense of, if in this original response they just checked a box and didn't provide any detail, we didn't follow up to do that.
But what we found, and you can see it on this graphic, Using the blue approach, the separate questions approach, and the green approach, the combined with detailed checkboxes, yielded similar levels of detailed reporting. Both of those were higher than we got just using the right in line with the red approach, the streamlined approach. But overall, we found that we're getting higher levels of reporting of detail on paper, we believe, with this 2017 approach that simply uses the right in line rather than the conceptual checkboxes. So we're confident that moving forward, we're going to be able to collect those types of details. But overall, like we saw in 2010 census as well, the levels of detailed reporting for AIN are generally lower than they are for some of the other groups, such as Asian or Hispanic. But as Mike was saying, we didn't do follow-up to then say, could you fill this in? You know, all of these are options for people to self-identify. We're not expecting with any group that there's going to be 100% detailed reporting, but we're encouraging people to make sure they understand they have the opportunity to report that detail, and that's
Great.
what these approaches
My
have done.
apology, I misunderstood re-interview. When I heard that, I immediately keyed in. I think my comment is there is discussion, even in the OMB Federal Register notice, of using detail information for federal agencies, and we are concerned about that as an AIAN population because typically we don't fill in the blank, and that has, at least in 2010, was the case, and it's a significant percentage that did not provide that additional detail. So I'm going to be very interested in how this progresses as federal agencies are having those discussions, and as an already undercounted population, we are concerned about moving the actual data to a lower level where our undercount would be even more extreme. So thank you for that.
So we have James on the line. Operator, can you open James's line?
Yes.
This is the operator. One moment here.
Okay.
Go ahead, James. We can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. First of all, I wanted to thank Mike and Nicholas for the report because I actually found it fascinating, especially to go through and see, the specific differences and some of the challenges that the AIN community faces. I just have a comment and a question. The comment is, based upon the information that we got from that report, I did want to let you know that the groups that I am working with are going to be recommending to the OMB that we do adopt write-in with examples for the AIAN community. And I think a big part of it is because somewhat as you noted, the 3 checkboxes that were there in one of the options for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Central and South Americans, we actually saw in some communities in Alaska that caused confusion because we ran into some instances in our litigation where we were having villages that were reporting a fairly large number of American Indians, and when we actually spoke with people in those communities, they didn't really identify any American Indians that lived in their community. They were all Alaska Natives. So I think the self-identification is going to be the much better approach to take. I do agree with Carol that I think there may be a high level of people not filling in that blank, and I think that's going to make it critical that the enumerators and anyone doing follow-up in the AIN community provide adequate instructions to the respondent to make sure that they understand exactly what it is they're supposed to do with the blank that's being provided. The question I had was, on page 58 of the report, there was a note that there was no non-response follow-up in locations with high rates of non-mailable addresses. And I guess I was wondering, to what extent, if any, did you adjust the way that you were doing this, or did your analysis change for the American Indian and Alaska Native community, given the fact that such a large number of people in the AIN community have non-mailable addresses? Did that impact your findings at all?
Hi, thank you for your question. So, and thank you for carefully reading the report. So it is true that, again, there was no non-response follow-up in the test, and for areas that have a high number of non-mailable addresses, for instance, update enumerate areas, and American Indian and Alaska Native reservations often fall into our updated enumerate areas, so not all of those areas were included in our sample. So that is a limitation, but we did attempt to overcome that limitation by heavily oversampling areas estimated to have higher American Indian, Alaska Natives, and other groups that were in those mailable areas.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
I think we'd maybe like to, Gilberto, do you have anything, or move on to the next portion of your presentation?
Thanks, Dita. So Mike is going to talk about, as I catch up with the slides, the results for the Middle Eastern North African analysis regarding a MENA category.
So as Nicholas just mentioned, next we're going to focus on the second dimension of the NCT research, which examines the response categories, and namely exploring how to collect and tabulate data for respondents of Middle Eastern or North African heritage. Since the mid-1990s, MENA community leaders and stakeholders have urged the Office of Management and Budget and the Census Bureau to add a separate response category for MENA respondents. These grassroots efforts have been critical to the testing of a MENA category. The Census Bureau and all federal statistical agencies do follow the 1997 OMB standards for classifying and tabulating data on race and ethnicity, and according to these standards, MENA responses to the question on race are classified as white. In 1997, OMB conducted a review and revision of the standards. During that process, ultimately it was determined that there would not be a separate category added, but that more review should be undertaken, and the 2010 alternative questionnaire experiment and this NCT are part of that research. This graphic illustrates examples of two of the many research designs that we tested in the NCT. First, the design on the left includes Middle Eastern or North African examples, such as Lebanese and Egyptian, within the white category. The design on the right places a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category among the options for selecting one or more race or origin groups. We ordered the race and ethnic categories based on population size, and as you can see, the MENA category was placed between the American Indian or Alaska Native category and the Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander category, and that was based on estimated population size using American Community Survey ancestry data. We've talked about the classification of MENA before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but in order to be able to tabulate and collect MENA data, we needed to be able to define it. So in 2015, we undertook an extensive effort collaborating with many organizations that identified and published classifications on the MENA region of the world to be able to define it for the purposes of the NCT. These organizations included research centers, universities, non-governmental organizations, and other US federal agencies. After looking at all of these classifications, we determined which countries were in the majority, or over 50% of these classifications. And this working classification included 19 different nationalities, 11 transnational ethnic groups, general geographic terms, and various pan-ethnic terms. In addition, I want to note that we oversampled as part of the MENA oversample for certain groups that are not in the working classification. And these are certain groups that various scholars and stakeholders suggested maybe should be part of the classification, but there was maybe a little bit of disagreement and they didn't meet that 50% threshold. These included such groups such as Afghan, Somali, and Turkish, for example. And next, moving on to the results, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've seen this before, but the bottom line is that when we offer a MENA category, people who would identify as MENA do tend to use that category when it's available. And when we do not offer that category, MENA respondents generally use the white category when no MENA category is available. The next couple slides go into the weeds a little bit more, looking at detailed reporting for groups that are first in the working classification, and then after that I'm going to talk about those that were in the MENA oversample in terms of where they're telling us those detailed groups, whether they saw a distinct MENA category or whether we did not offer them that option. So for instance, you can see here that generally speaking, as already said, when we don't offer a MENA option, people are tending to identify within the white category, and that's represented by that pink bar here. For instance, we're calling out Iranian and Algerian respondents who had very high rates are telling us those ethnicities within the white write-in field. However, when we do offer a MENA category, each of these ethnicities are generally telling us that within the MENA category. They're using that category. There's a little bit of variation here, but as you can see, they're tending to use the MENA option to report that detailed information. Next, you see here, slide looks very similar, but it is different. These are detailed reporting for groups not in the current working classification. We wanted to see, when we offered the MENA category, are they actually using it? On the left-hand side, we see we did not offer the MENA category. And for the most part, these groups are telling us in the white category. For instance, Armenian, they are tending to use the white category to report Armenian. Somali and Sudanese respondents, however, are using the black category to tell us that level of detail. However, even when we offer the MENA category, these same groups are tending to not use it. The MENA category is represented by the orange bars here. Armenian respondents still using the white category when we offered it. Somali respondents, for instance, still using the black category option. So in summary, our findings showed that the use of a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category does appear to elicit higher quality data for people who would identify with MENA. Specifically, these results show that people who identify as MENA do use that category when it's available. People who identify as MENA, though, have trouble identifying as only MENA when no specific category is available. The nationalities and ethnicities in the 2015 NCT working classification did tend to identify as MENA when the category was available. However, the nationalities and ethnicities in our MENA oversample did not identify as MENA even when we did offer that category. And next, I think we're going to pause to focus on any discussion regarding the results for a distinct MENA category.
So we actually have discussants. I didn't know if you wanted to do questions or you guys wanted to do your discussant portion before we move on to the separate.
If you'd like to do the presentation, I think that would be good at this point, and that's going to coincide with the discussion, hopefully.
Okay, so Dheeraj asked two slow-speaking people to comment and follow up on the MENA and the combined. Let me offer just the general observations, and then Murad will go a little bit into more details and recommendations. Let me just say first that, these, and I want to thank the Census for going into these content testing and the commitment for these to explore these issues. These are critical issues. We have an increased complexity of our diversity, and these are the issues that we need to go back and ask ourselves, are they still the questions that they need to be asked? And you can see that the report is detailed and exhaustive. You can see that, especially I want to say to the team how much I appreciate their own commitment to do this and to do it well. And consider that they've really have been available. They've been engaged. I know Roberto only yesterday met with a group of 40 activists from all over the country meeting here in DC. So this level of engagement has been going on throughout the process. I want to thank you, Director Thompson, for being part of this outreach and being available on these issues. So the level of engagement, the level of feedback has been very high throughout this process. And the level of appreciation of the complexity of these questions was also very high. I want to also comment a little bit about the quality of the science this really has been a very solid scientific research. The fact that you have a sample of 1.2 million and you have a significant response rate of 51, almost 52%. And not only that, they augmented all of this with outside scientific experts on this question. They've done evaluation, they've done comparison. So they've done community focus group. So the quality of science is extremely high and can frankly stand the test of any challenge here. And make the case for the issues that we are putting forward. My last word is that I want to say that the team of Nicholas, Michael, and Roberto, we need to say how much we appreciate your leadership on this and your engagement and your frankly commitment, even personal commitment to do this. So thank you so much, and I'll leave Murad to kind of do some additional.
Thank you, Hassan. You know, you put 5 Iranian Americans in a room and ask them about their identity, you probably get like 10 responses. So we understand how hard of a task you had, and I also want to thank you guys for the incredible job that you guys have done. So what was covered, this slide basically goes over what has been covered, but for Hassan and I's discussion today, we want to focus on the combined question formats and the inclusion of the MENA category. So you go next slide. So the results of the NCT indicate that the optimal question format is the combined question with detailed checkboxes, increases reporting within the current OMB categories, decreases response rates, improves accuracy and reliability, overall higher consistency for Hispanic, same or higher level of detailed reporting, especially on internet forms. I think you had 99% Asian detailed reporting, 95% Hispanic, and 93% white. As Ann pointed out during the April 5th virtual meeting, that this could suggest a wealth of new data previously not available. So we think that's great. Ronald Reagan once noted that anyone from any corner of the world can come and live in the United States and become an American. You know, given our diversity as a nation, having a combined question with detailed checkboxes is the most effective means for allowing individuals to self-identify themselves and increase their response rate. I think this is particularly going to be more important as our society gets more integrated. Recent study done about the Iranian American community found that between 1995 and 2007, nearly 50% of Iranian Americans married someone that's not an Iranian American. And I think my family is pretty good evidence of that as well. My nieces have Filipino roots, European roots, and obviously Iranian roots. And my own son as well, partly European, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Iranian obviously, and even a little bit of a Native American. So I think moving forward, you know, using this sort of self-identity is a good policy, and I think it should be, and we highly recommend that you guys incorporate that. So in regards to the MENA question, next slide, please. So in regards to MENA, results show when the category is available, groups who identify with MENA most frequently report in that category. I think it was around 76%. And it shows that when it is available, it decreases the other major categories, such as white, black, some other race, or another category. You know, it's interesting, it's very similar to the combined question approaches with Hispanics. MENA category allows respondents to report their MENA identity. I think you see a parallel there. However, we do maintain that persons with origin in MENA can identify with different racial backgrounds. That's why we think ethnicity is an appropriate approach to this new category. And also, I want to note that, you know, it seems that you guys did a pretty good job in defining who belongs in the MENA category. But I think under the NCT format, MENA was treated as two separate regions, where you had the Middle East region and then you had the North Africa region, and then you provided a list of the 3 largest populations in those regions. One thing we recommend or suggest the census treat MENA as one region instead of 2, with sub-boxes assigned to the largest groups by population in the US. And this would be Lebanese, Iranian, Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqi, and Israeli, while using examples to include transnational groups like Kurds or Syrians, Gulf nations like Yemenis or Saudis, and other African populations like Tunisians. This may, you know, have a higher response rate, in our opinion. Next slide. So I think you guys are going to come with some of these questions as well for NAC discussion. What are your thoughts on an optimal design question for format, combined question with detailed checkboxes approach? Any suggestions for outreach and engagement about the 2015 NCT research with specific organizations or stakeholders? I think we could have a discussion about the next steps with OMB and US Congress. You know, I think we're going to see, you're already seeing some political pushback on the MENA category in particular, and I would imagine on the combined question format. In terms of the OMB, you know, the MENA advocacy groups or coalition have already been in touch with OMB, and we have, you know, recommended that it be treated as a minimum reporting category, as well as an ethnicity. So that has been done, and we'll see what the outcome of that is going to be. I think another good question, you know, we discussed this a little bit yesterday, and I think we all feel pretty much the same on about this issue on addressing concerns about privacy in the 2020 census. In particular, you're going to have immigrant communities, MENA in particular, very concerned about this issue. One of the things that we did or worked on, hey, Tara? Tara? Oh. The video? Yeah. Okay. So I want to show you guys a video that we worked on, and as part of our 2010 census campaign, we actually did a write-in campaign encouraging Iranian Americans to participate in the census and mark some other race and put Iranian American down. But I thought it would be good to show it as an example of some of the outreach that we could do. In particular, we did a series of PSAs, and one of them was done by a comedian. His name was Maz Jobrani. He's an Iranian-American comedian. And once he did that, and once that video was released, I thought our campaign really went to the next level. And my understanding of write-in campaigns, it was one of the most successful ones that has been done in the past. And I think it might be a good idea to reach out to, in regards to the MENA category, to reach out to some of the actors, the comedians, and through humor, actually, try to touch this community. So go ahead. Okay.
Census Bureau? Oh, yes, I've heard of the Census. And I'm here because you didn't fill out your forms. Oh, I didn't. I'm sorry, I was very busy. So I'm going to talk you through the questions, and when I get to the question about race, I suggest you tell me to write Iranian American or Iranian.
Is there a box for Iranian American?
No, there's no box, but I will check other and then write in Iranian American.
Wait, why? Just put why. There's a box for why.
Technically that's true, but that's not going to help us be counted.
Oh, is there benefit?
Potentially gives Iranians minority status, Persian-speaking nurses, and federal funding for our community.
Who does this information go to?
Oh, all this information is private and strictly confidential.
I don't know about that one.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go. Where do you want to go? I'm just joking to you.
So, how many people live in this household?
0.
What's the annual income range?
0.
What's your phone number? Let me guess. 000.
No. 310 000 0000.
Just curious, what's your favorite movie then? Sir.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. Last question.
I need to sleep.
Yeah, you do. Okay, so your race?
Italian. They call me Dottore. That's Italian for doctor. Dottore.
We talked about?
Always wanted to be Italian. Isn't Italian? That's why I was up Ferronchi. My friends, they call me Kame, like Italian, like come here, how are you? I'm Italian. Come here, come here.
Remember what we talked about putting Iranian American?
I have a hard time remembering my Italian.
The Census Bureau just reported a shocking 250% increase in Italians in the U.S. This was Fox News Flash. Coming up next, the remake of Zorro. Stay with us.
Well, the quality wasn't as good as I thought, but, yeah. Anyway, that was an example. I think, Maz works with a number of other comedians from the MENA community, and they actually go around the country and the world and do shows. I think if some sort of partnership could be done with them, it could be effective.
Hassan and Murad, thank you for your comments and your suggestions and also your encouragement and support. We greatly appreciate it. We really, really appreciate your feedback. Didas, would you like to go through Q&A on the MENA topic or other topics? We have a little bit more that we can present, but I wanted to see if there are other questions or comments.
Are there questions? Anne?
I just have a question for Murad, actually, just to clarify something. And actually about the video, which I've seen before, and it's very funny. The only thing is, isn't it a little worrisome to suggest to the public that the census enumerator comes around and tells people what to put down? Like, I suggest you check some other, I don't know if that got cleared with the census, but I think the idea of this kind of PSA is brilliant. I think it'd be great to do with humor. On that particular point, I would maybe try to clear it before putting it out there, but
Well noted. Well noted. This campaign wasn't done in coordination with the census, so.
Got it. Okay. All right. But I do. Okay, great. I do have a question.
Maybe we could bring you along as our, consultant.
Okay. All right. I want a spot in the video then.
Okay.
We do it, but I do have a question for Murad, just to clarify. So, in your comment about maybe wanting to see MENA treated not as two regions, but as one region, and then just offer as examples the largest groups, regardless of whether they're in the Middle East or North Africa. So I get that, but you also mentioned wanting in some way to indicate or to include, for example, Gulf populations, transnational, African, and so forth. And so I was just trying to wonder, how would that work? Because, for example, the Gulf populations are not the biggest in the US. Like, you're not going to have Qatari and Bahraini, and so how would it work, signaling?
I think in the detailed questions, you have boxes, and then they list some examples, right? So I think that's what it's referring to. And I think it captures more of the essence of the region, where more people can see and identify, okay, I'm from the Gulf area, I'm maybe not my particular country, but it's listed there, and I see that. I'll let Hassan comment because it's more of his.
And just to follow up on that, I think that with our work in the 2017 census test, we have revised the examples that are shown and also the checkboxes to illustrate more of that broad diversity within the MENA region. And so we include Kurdish as an example group, and we've also added Israeli as one of the checkboxes to really illustrate that this is more broadly a region that includes a lot of different identities. And that's what we're fielding in the 17 as an advancement from what we did first in the 2015 test. So we've been hearing that feedback and really appreciate.
What I'm really, the best outcome of this is that you have the option of self-identify, and you have it in many ways. So that's a gain and a shift that is going to be welcome in the community. So and that's something that we're very much in support. That option of self-identify,
Just follow up. I just wanted to clarify on what you were proposing for the check boxes, which are linked to population size, as best we know it, versus what the examples might be, and that might be the place where they have more leeway to bring in, Gulf populations and others. So, thank you.
So are there any other questions? Because I noticed in your presentation you had some recommendations that would you like to present those? We'll have Stuart talk for us to discuss and vote on right now, since we have some time. Okay, Stuart, did you want to?
Just one quick thing. It's kind of along the lines of Anne. I'm learning a lot, and I think there are a lot of concerns, and I'm glad that this is a focus and an area of progress. The one thing that I was wondering about, figuring out the category and the big name, obviously, it's a new term, it enters into our vocabulary. So this idea of not wanting to have Middle East or North African, has there been some thought about what the global term would be if that was the direction that things went? I'm just trying to imagine what.
So to address some of that, we had a forum in 2015 with MENA scholars from around the country, and we first presented the idea of using a term, Middle Eastern North African. What do you think of that? What do you think of the acronym MENA or MENA? And what we heard overwhelmingly in terms of the responses was that there was agreement that that terminology and that category is the one that should be used. This was something that was discussed during the 1990s when the OMB was considering the revisions for the 1977 standards, and there was a lot of discussion and debate about what should this category be called if it were to be used. So we felt that with that feedback and also from the feedback from the 2015 NCT research, qualitative research that's been done, this is a new potential category and in many ways similar to a new Hispanic category that was introduced in 1970 or 1980. But we've already been seeing readily that respondents are identifying with the category, that they're seeing it as a place to report those detailed identities. So we feel that moving forward with this category, if it were to be used, that the MENA, Middle Eastern North African terminology is the terminology that's the most effective.
Gilberto and then Desi.
I just wanted to mention, that I like the way the video shows the diversity in that community. And when we consider the communication and outreach, I think the group working here should look at this and see it as a possibility for self-identification of people.
Desi?
Are we only commenting on me now, or are we commenting on the combined question in general, or?
I think you can, yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to apologize. I missed some of the morning. I ate something terrible or came down ill this morning. But I want to thank Nicholas, and I'm not sure if Carol or any of my other colleagues made comments, but I wanted to just bring a couple to the forefront. Is there any chance that the detailed checkboxes with write-in space will be tested on the paper version for AIANs? I know that you are testing it so far, only in the online. Is there any chance that it would be tested in the paper?
Yeah, so just to clarify, on paper, the paper version is a little bit different than what we do online. We have space constraints, and with online, we're able to take advantage of the technology. But on paper, the plan is to have a checkbox for the broader American Indian or Alaska Native, and then a write-in field to collect the detailed information.
But it will not look the same as the online, right? There will be two different formats of that question, and that will only apply to the AIAN category. Is that correct?
And so, yeah, so it's a little bit different. So then in online, the first, if we were to have a combined question, the first screen would have the major checkbox categories, which includes American Indian or Alaska Native, and then if a respondent selected that, then they would be asked to provide additional information, which would be a series of 3 write-in fields.
Sure. And I guess it's important, I think, that my colleagues know that this is only applicable to the AIAN category, right? No other race categories or ethnic categories are going to have 2 different formats.
And also, just to follow up on what Mike was saying, I'm going to pull up the slide here, but we found this to be the most effective way to get the more accurate reporting and the more detailed reporting for AINs. And that's what part of our intention was, to optimize the designs for the different modes, rather than saying one design is going to apply to every single mode, regardless of what types of results it gets for us. So
Is it best practice, though, to do that, to have these kind of mode differences? And I guess I'm concerned about that moving forward, especially if it's only going to apply to American Indians and Alaska Natives.
Well, yeah, so I guess to that, I would say that yes, typically with a mixed mode survey, and the 2020 census is a mixed mode format, that you want to take advantage of the different technologies. The one concern, which we don't think is happening, would be that if a respondent is doing something different in each mode, a respondent hypothetically on paper would select Asian, but online they wouldn't, or they would do something else. And we don't have any reason to think that specifically is happening.
So we're seeing this differential here as a positive, in that we're getting more effective data using an approach on paper that has a write-in line, and then using the approach online that has these 3 dedicated spaces. We tested different things within the NCT to figure out how the results are impacted by the different formats that we're using, and moving forward from 15 to 17, we've seen this as a better approach to take with the paper version, to use the dedicated write-in line rather than the 3 conceptual checkboxes followed by that write-in line. So again, we're looking at it as a positive because of the ways in which respondents are reacting and responding to the form with these different approaches. This is a more effective way to collect that type of detailed information, rather than sticking with the way that we had and noting that it was not as successful. We felt that it was better to move forward.
But ultimately, isn't this online version where every detailed checkbox has their own write-in, that's ultimately the most ideal, right, in your testing? But due to the constraints of space, that's not going to happen. I mean, I think that needs to be said.
Also, I don't know if that's necessarily what we would agree with. We felt that in these different modes, we need to be able to optimize what we're presenting to the respondent so that they can effectively self-identify. We have different ways in which we primarily, at the beginning of all this, talked about with NAC and with others, including NCAI and AFN and other American Indian Alaska Native groups and stakeholders. Should we be using detailed checkboxes at all for the AIN community when, unlike Asians or Hispanics, 10% of American Indians and Alaska Natives would find themselves with a box. And unlike Hispanics and Latinos, where that's 85, 90%, we were first testing the approach conceptually to use detailed American Indian, Alaska Native, and Central South American Indian checkboxes as a way to approximate detailed checkboxes for AINs, but we didn't find that to be as effective as simply using the write-in line. And so the write-in approach for paper was the one that we felt we should move forward with in the 17 test.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more question. I don't know if Carol brought this up or if she wants to comment, but I know that there are many letters being circulated by various Alaska Native groups that are requesting consideration of actually expanding that write-in, the actual length, because of the length of names for many villages and tribes, and that's a constraint. Even though you're collecting, tabulating up to 6 entries, the actual space constraints and actually being able to write those in is an issue.
Online respondents, our write-in field accommodates the space that somebody's writing in, and I believe it actually collects up to 200 characters in each of those write-in fields for online respondents. We collect the same for paper if somebody's able to write small enough and we're able to data capture it, but there is the space constraint on paper. But online, we are able to accommodate whatever information.
But that's
we're
the
actually
problem,
doing we're
right?
actually doing both, Desi. So on the paper, whatever you write in, we're going to collect up to 200 characters. So it's a
On
very, very
paper.
long on paper. And so someone may not be able to squeeze that in, and we've seen this in the past. They're writing in the margins. We zoom out to collect all of that information.
Okay.
We capture it. In the past, we only captured up to 30 characters.
Okay.
We did in this test, and we were recommending for moving forward 200 characters on paper, online, et cetera. And so all of those long names, and we did this purposefully because we recognize the length of the names of many groups, particularly American Indians and Pacific Islanders, are longer than 30 characters. So we wanted to be able to make sure that we can capture that effectively.
Is there a chance of adding another line of boxes to write in, or we're just supposed to let people know to write in the margins? I mean, it just seems like if there's a way to make that uniform, it would be ideal.
So we haven't made the final determinations for the exact wording and the exact optics on 2020, but we've seen effectively through this research that using that single write-in line on paper does work to help us capture those responses. We're looking again at all of the information that someone reports. And as you go forward, when we have a final version, I think that's also going to be part of the partnership and the communications to help people understand, if you have something that's longer than what seems to fit in here, let's give some guidance about how you can have that information captured. And in the past, we've seen people using different terminology, acronyms, et cetera. We want to encourage people to fully identify their entire name, their entire affiliation, their entire tribe. And so by doing so, we want to be able to talk about that with AIN communities and leaders so that we know what to look for when people are reporting in certain ways. And that's reflective in our code list and in the other opportunities that we have to make sure that we recognize these different types of responses, whether they be the entire name of a federally recognized tribe, which may be very long, or an acronym for that name, or a shortened version of that name, all of which we've seen in the past, all of which I expect we're going to continue to see in the future, but we have readily identified, captured, and then tabulated appropriately to the different groups. So we recognize the constraints, but also the opportunities to make sure it's done right.
Thank you. I think I'll move forward with a recommendation at some point on that, but thank you.
So Anne and then Alasu. And then I know you guys have additional slides that you want to get through to where, okay, but I know you've covered it.
Wherever you want to keep the conversation going, we're here for all of the time that you have to address any questions. But we'd like to hear your discussion.
I think you've covered most of the stuff in your,
Absolutely.
on our virtual meetings as
Yes,
well. So
exactly.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So I have a question for Nicholas and Mike about the MENA categories. Really, 2 questions. Yesterday, so Nancy Potok made it clear to us that regardless of what OMB does, even if OMB doesn't change its standards at all, that the Census Bureau could go ahead and field the MENA checkbox, that you'd be allowed to collect that level of detail. So my first question is, if OMB doesn't decide to make MENA a minimum reporting category, do you think that Census Bureau would go ahead and use this MENA checkbox? I mean, you have the right to do it, but would you do it? Do you think it's likely that you would do it without OMB making that decision, since you've identified the MENA checkbox as part of an optimal strategy? And then my second question is, if you did go ahead and decide to field a MENA checkbox in the absence of it being a minimum reporting category for OMB, what might the tabulations of data look like that we see in census products, like your census briefs and things like that? You know, if it's not a minimum reporting category, could you nonetheless provide us with census reports and the census briefs that would break out the MENA category separately from the white, basically? Thank you.
Great questions, no easy questions. We have been thinking about this, to be honest with you, and it's a very important part of our waiting and hoping to see what happens with the decisions by OMB. So when we have those decisions made, this answer is going to be a whole lot easier. But as of now, we've already been, and I can go forward in some of these slides, thinking about different tabulations that we have, regardless of, you know, what approach is taken. We do plan to collect detailed data across groups. We do plan to code, edit, tabulate detailed data. And if you look at a group like the MENA community, we found that people were writing it in. They're writing in these identities. Generally, they're writing them in under the MENA category when it's available to them, but they're also writing them in when the MENA category is not there. People are identifying as Lebanese, Iranian, Moroccan. They're communicating that these identities are important to them and they'd like to have the data. So we've talked about some of this before in our virtual meeting, and we talked about potential tabulations. I'll go back to this one here. If a MENA category is approved as a minimum reporting category by OMB, that's under review now, obviously we could provide tabulations for Middle Eastern or North African as a group. This is something that effectively moving forward, if it's identified as a minimum separate category, then you might see something like that in the PL, in the first initial data tabs that we have that show these types of high-level categorical data. We also would look forward in terms of tabulations to scenarios. I'm going to skip here to MENA reporting. Someone who's reporting as Syrian and white, Middle Eastern and Syrian, they would go into tabulations as being reporting 2 or more responses. They've told us that they're white and they're MENA. Like we've done in the past for 2000 and 2010, when categories are being reported in different groups, we provide minimum tabulations. We talk about groups that report alone or groups that report multiple responses. So someone reporting as white and MENA would be tabbed as 2 or more, but also in our tabulations, of course, you know, we provide alone or in combination tabulations. So this would reflect both white and MENA as a response category. And thinking about all of that, again, we have several months before we get to a decision, but we also have to think about the scenarios in which what we would do if MENA is not recommended as a minimum category group. So I think that effectively we're looking to provide those details, but whether or not it's broken out in something separately like a public law PL table, that's still to be determined. Because then it begs other questions. Well, what about the other detail groups within categories? Why is there no Caribbean aggregation within a PL table? Why is there no Eastern European aggregation or South Asian aggregation when, for the most part, the PL provides the high-level major categories that are the minimum groups? So those conversations are going to continue. Our thinking about it is going to evolve over the next several months, both in conjunction with the IWG discussions, the OMB discussions. But the answer to all of this we will have clear later this year, we hope, so that we can then begin talking about this is what we can see for 2020. And we can start moving towards all those decisions that follow from there once we have that final version ready.
Nicholas, I think it's important to note that if OMB, and I don't know what OMB is going to do, so don't take this as anything, but if OMB decides that MENA is not a minimum category, suffice it to say there is more than enough time to work on the tabulations and get comments on the tabulations that we would put out. So it's not like they would say it's not a minimum category and then boom, we're done with the way we tabulate data. We're still going to, we could still collect it in a combined question, and then we could talk about how to tabulate it. Okay, so there is time for that. So it's not like we're running out of time.
Alice Sue, and then Kirsten, and then Desi, do you still have comments?
I wanted to ask what happens in the combined question with with editing when there is an inconsistency between the check box and what was written in. That is, where what is written in does not match what OMB considers goes in that box.
Great question, Ali Sue, and something that we've thought about quite a lot, not just with this research, because we had to look at this in the separate question approach, particularly with responses of some of the race. So some of the race in the separate question approach, we know yields tens of millions of responses, but those tens of millions of responses that we see, we talk about 97% of them are Hispanic or Latino responses. That's because responses that are not identified as some of the race, if they're written in on that line, they're edited and they're tabulated where they, quote, follow the classification. So someone who checks some of the race and writes in German, German's a European origin, German, European, identified as white, they don't remain in some of the race. They're classified and edited into the white tabulation count. Jamaican moves to black, Japanese moves to Asian. But when they're inconsistent reporting within, for example, the race categories now in the separate questions, we collect both of those responses. So if someone checks the box for American Indian Alaska Native and they write in that they're Jamaican, both of those answers are collected, both of them are preserved. We're honoring and respecting what that person has told us. I'm American Indian and I'm Jamaican. The same concept applies to the combined question. But what we've seen with the combined question and with the opportunity for groups to report within all the categories that they identify, we're getting more consistent reporting within where we would say the categories are classified. So people are more often checking the box and writing in something that matches. But again, if it doesn't match, if it's seen as inconsistent, we're collecting and retaining both of those responses.
In the specific case of MENA, say someone, what falls inside MENA, there's some, different views potentially, right?
Right, and we would collect and tabulate both of those, and we did that in the NCT. So if someone reported that they were a group that we didn't have in our classification system as MENA for this research, we still collected that response, we still tabulated it. If they marked MENA, we also tabulated MENA as their response.
Okay, thank you.
So we're applying that concept across the board to respect what the individual has told us and to not presume that we know more than you do about the fact that you've checked this box and told us that you're something.
What do you do with the check box marked for Hispanic and write-in of American?
Oh, that's another great question. So American responses are also collected and tabulated for the 2015 NCT. This is something that we introduced because we recognize and we've heard from stakeholders and from advisors that common identities may be American. I'm Asian and I'm American. I'm black and I'm American. Those are valid responses. And so we have, and you can see this in the 2015 NCT report, in the code list, we have dedicated tabulation categories that reflect those scenarios. Someone checked a major category box and they wrote in the term American, and they're classified as American within that category. White American, black American, Asian American, et cetera.
Go ahead, yeah.
This is just a point of clarification. From Ann's question about whether or not the minimum tabulation is approved within OMB. And so I'm just realizing that I was going to say problem, but the challenge that you're going to have if you go with the MENA category, because if I understand correctly, you're then going to have a requirement to decide how to report people that reported as the MENA category as to within a minimum category. Does that make sense? So you would have to, so let's just say MENA is not approved within OMB as a minimum reporting category. You have an obligation, well, Census has an obligation to then retabulate all the people that reported as MENA up to a minimum reporting category. And that might be a challenge because you could go off of what they checked off. Then that's what you're saying, that we would get feedback as to which check boxes or what they wrote in, which race that should go what minimum category that should go back to? Is that
Well,
what the
the
challenge
guidance
is?
would be there already. So responses now that come in as Lebanese or Iranian or Moroccan, Egyptian, et cetera, they're classified under the minimum tabulation category of white.
Okay,
And so all of those responses are aggregated within that larger category called white. That's one of the areas of consideration that the IWG and OMB are looking at right now. And depending on what decision is made by OMB with the standards, the Census Bureau will follow
right.
that decision.
So if we actually did this question and had MENA, there would be some people that could check MENA with no designation, no checkbox, and no write-in. So then you would have to figure out how to report that into a minimum category. Is that another challenge that you would face?
No.
Okay, so you don't have to report them in a minimum
We'll
category?
follow whatever guidance is there.
To be clear, Kirsten, right now, if they don't make MENA a minimum category,
Right.
the way OMB defines MENA is white.
Okay, so then it would.
The
okay.
white population, by OMB's definition, is the indigenous people of Europe,
Okay.
North Africa, and the Middle East. And so it would be white
Okay.
under their definition.
Okay, okay. So then it's not, I was worried, I didn't know how, if someone didn't designate a specific checkbox, how that would
Where
be
it would-
reported out.
okay.
But we don't have that problem yet, or challenge yet, doesn't matter.
Desi, did you, and then Alcida, did you have, okay.
I just have more of a comment, because a lot of people within the American Indian, Alaska Native community are quite concerned about the Hispanic, combined Hispanic and American Indian population. And so I know we've talked about this on the phone before, but I think I need to say it again, because I know that there are people watching this and who are concerned about that and about the numbers and how that's going to reflect investment and money in Indian country. But it's a matter of collection versus tabulation. So I think what this means for us is if the combined question goes forward, we really need to do a better job of advocating to agencies how we want American Indian Alaska Native data to be aggregated or disaggregated to maximize numbers. There's no standard aside from the minimum OMB standards for how AIM populations are defined across agencies and departments within agencies. And so to me, this it really poses an opportunity for advocacy and to figuring out how American Indians and Alaska Natives can come together to be those advocates to maximize our numbers as a result of this. Thanks.
So Enrique had a comment, and then we'll go to Morat.
So if I could go back to Kirsten's question. OMB will come out with guidance as to whether MENA would be a separate category or remain within white, I guess, going forward. We can actually tabulate it as a subgroup to the white and show the numbers explicitly if we were to collect it. It really, as Nicholas said, it does not matter to us. We can collect the detail because people identify and see themselves as MENA, and then we can tabulate it as a subgroup of white or as a separate category.
Morat?
I just have a quick follow-up question on the oversample. So it indicated that only 14% of those that were oversampled chose MENA, is that correct? Around that? But I guess my question is, for example, when you were testing the oversample, the 6 countries that you included in that test, was it consistent throughout? So if you were testing people from Turkey, for example, and you said, do you belong in a MENA category, did they see themselves listed as in one of the boxes, or they didn't see themselves listed? And if they didn't see themselves listed, do you think your numbers would change at all if they do see themselves listed?
So just so we can definitely address all the different things that you just brought up, Morad, we're going to go through them pretty slowly. So your first question, to repeat, was about the sample design for the NCT, and were you asking, did we oversample from MENA at a certain rate?
No, I mean, my question is pretty simple. Like when
Okay.
you tested the oversample, and I'll take Turkey as an example, right? When you went to them and say, you identify with the MENA category. Did they see their name in as one of the sub-boxes or one of the examples? And
No.
if they didn't see their name, do you think your results would be different if they did see Turkey there as a box or as an example?
Okay, so what we used as examples for the MENA group were the groups that were the largest groups in the United States representing the Middle East and North Africa from those groups that were in the Census Bureau's MENA classification. And again, that classification list, I'm going to go back a few slides here. Bear with us. And this is detailed in the report, but we started with analyzing classifications that are already used in government, academic, and non-governmental organizations, where different nationalities from the MENA region are listed as groups within those definitions. We had 15 definitions that we looked at from these different inputs, and then we took all of the groups that were in at least 50% of those classifications and had them listed as part of our MENA working classification. So for example, those 19 nationalities were always in at least half of those definitions. So you're seeing Egyptian all the time as part of MENA. You're seeing Syrian all the time as part of MENA. In addition, there were transnational groups, there were pan-ethnic groups, and general groups like Middle Eastern or Kurdish or Arab in those definitions as well. That's what led to our core definition of the MENA category for the NCT. But then, based on feedback from both the advisory committee and from MENA researchers and scholars, and from the community in response to when we first put this out as a potential test, we had a Federal Register notice that got thousands and thousands of comments that also recommended there are other groups outside of this core classification that you've developed that we, the community, believe are MENA as well. Turkish, for example, or Armenian. So what we were able to do was then oversample for both the MENA working classification group as well as drawing for other communities like Turkish, Armenian, and oversampling them as well. So just so that's clear, that was how we compared the two differences between within the MENA classification and possibly within the MENA classification. We then wanted to see what types of data would result in terms of how do those groups respond. We saw, for the most part, that when there is a MENA category, the groups that were in the classification used it. They identified, these are the orange bars here. And then looking at the groups that were not in the MENA classification for the NCT, but that we oversampled, this is this next graphic, we can see that when the MENA category is not there, and when the MENA category is present, these groups are not identifying within the MENA category as much as you're seeing with the other groups that are included in the classification list. So Turkish, as you look at this at the bottom row, Turkish respondents in the NCT most often identified within the white category when there was no MENA category present. When there was a MENA category present, Turkish respondents also most often identified as white within that classification option. Some did identify as MENA. You can see the bar there that's in orange. A group that you may think is part of this list, we've detailed more of the groups in the report as well. There's smaller populations in the United States, but we felt that this was a pretty clear pattern that groups that are identified in the classification list as MENA are using that option to report their responses, and groups that are not included in the classification are not identifying as MENA. They were not listed as examples. None of these groups were examples, but they're not reporting themselves as MENA either. Did we address everything that you had, Morad? Okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? You have more on yours?
The last thing I think we went through already, just talking about potential tabulations and the ways in which things are done now, how they could be done differently in the future. I'll yield back the time to you, Ditas, if you have more questions.
So we have an opportunity here, because I know you guys ask us questions, to take recommendations both on the different sections of what your results are. I was wondering if we wanted to do the, oh, Arturo.
Since you've completed the presentation, Nicholas, just want to talk a little bit and understand then the timeline that we have, knowing that you have a deadline of April 1st, 2018. That's when the Census Bureau has to report to Congress the actual wording of the questions. Yesterday, we heard that OMB will probably issue a report by the end of the year, based on the comments. You know, the working group's going to issue a report, then OMB is going to look at that report and then issue its whatever decision it makes, probably not till the end of this year. So that gives the Census Bureau somehow between December and March. So what happens during that time period, and what opportunity are we going to have to engage with you during that time? What will y'all be doing during that period, and where do you see us being able to consult with you?
Great question, and John or Enrique, if you want to add anything to this. I pulled up the timeline where we are now and how we get to preparing for 2020 post next spring. I'll just go through that to echo what Arturo was just talking about, and then we can talk about opportunities for engagement. So we've been having engagement and outreach with you and many other stakeholders across the country for years. That's going to continue. And we're excited about that because all of the feedback and the encouragement that you've given us over the years has led us to get to where we are today. You know, we've done effective research, we've done effective engagement, and we have great results that are helping us to look at how we can move forward. So this spring, Mike and I this week, I think we did 5 engagement presentations here, Chicago, back and forth. We're happy to be able to continue doing that, and we'd like to continue getting feedback because it's important as you move towards something being delivered to Congress that people understand what's been done. This didn't start yesterday. What are the results? What can we understand from it? So we're preparing this spring and summer to have the questions for our 2018 end-to-end census test delivered to OMB, for OMB to review and approve. And as the OMB interagency working group is developing a report on the revisions to the standards, the potential revisions to the standards, that's happening throughout the summer. OMB has signaled, and Nancy may have said this yesterday, they're not having another period of public comment, but they are planning with other federal agencies to continue engaging with the public about the report when it's released, to get feedback, to hear what people think. And we'll be part of that as well. So I think as that report comes out, it will be a welcome opportunity to hear the thoughts from NAC, sometime this fall perhaps, maybe with another virtual meeting, depending on when the report is released. And then in advance of OMB making their decision in December, they've also signaled that they're looking for discussion and engagement with communities across the country between the issuance of that report and their decision being made. So several months there are opportunities for discussion.
No, but a key point that Nancy was making was they're going to have to decide how and if they're going to change the standards. If they don't change the standards at all, what Nancy said was, we can't ask a combined question because we have to change the standards to ask a combined question. So it's going to be vitally important for us to get from OMB what they're going to do with those standards as soon as possible so we know how to go forward.
Could I ask a follow-up question then? Will the OMB decision then affect what the question will be on the end-to-end test? Assuming that OMB does not change the standards?
We've already submitted the questions for the end-to-end test.
Okay, so the end-to-end.
They're already in progress, and we've already programmed the questions. We've talked to OMB about what we're doing on those questions, and we're going to use the combined question.
For the end-to-end test?
For the end-to-end.
Anne?
Just 2 questions, and maybe one follow-up. Could we see the end-to-end questions? Is that something that we in the NAC could see? And then the second question is following Arturo's question about how might we be helpful and have input in this process. I just noticed that our spring NAC meeting is currently scheduled for after April 1st. And I'm just going to throw out the possibility that we might convene the NAC earlier in the spring. Before that point, in a sense, perhaps sometime between the point where OMB makes these decisions and final question wording goes to Congress. I realize there's lots of plannings, lots of things that have to be in the works, but if in any way it might be helpful to get input or feedback or thoughts on the last gasp, I wanted to throw out that possibility.
We can always do a virtual meeting, which I think I would suggest as a better course of action, because we can't really predict when OMB is going to make their decision. But when they do, we can then set up and have a virtual meeting and get, the NAC involved with comments and the like. So I think that would probably be the strategy we'd pursue. Not that we don't like having a personal meeting, but it's just a lot easier to schedule a virtual meeting.
Any other questions? Nope. Would we like to move to?
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the composition of OMB in terms of who sits on the committee? Yes.
That's an inherent function of the group that Nancy Potok is in charge of. The Paperwork Reduction Act puts it under the Chief Statistician of the United States. So that's her responsibility to weigh all the considerations and input and reach a decision. She actually has that responsibility. So she'll be making the decision.
I just want to say, I believe Tara was going to get us the list of the working group, though, the OMB working group, that information is public.
Hey, can somebody get them the list, pull up the list and get them the list of the federal work? You can get that done, right, Enrique? So we can get you the list of who's on the federal working group.
Tiras, is it appropriate at this time if we could put a recommendation based on the research that's been done, based on the consultation, based on the feedback, that we put a recommendation that this committee support separate MENA combined question? Would that be appropriate at this time?
I believe so, and I want to see, under our NCT submitted recommendations, we had quite a few, if any of those captured that already, so you guys don't have to type that up, but we would need it typed up so we can go through it. Do you guys have that on your slide? So can we put that slide up, and then so that the committee knows what we're voting on?
Tiras, I also submitted it as one of my recommendations to the chair NAC email,
Right.
so if that's pulled up, that language would be in the pile, but I don't know.
Okay, it should be, she's reviewing the file right now, okay. And you had your name associated with it? Just so that.
What's the problem? I thought that my name would be on the email, but as we learned this morning, our individual names were not on the email, so my name is not on it.
Okay, we are looking, because Tara pulled together a compiled list. Are you able to find that one? Anne's is on there, so we can pull it up, but she's saying that she doesn't see it, so.
Question, Ann, did you send it through your iPad?
I sent it through this iPad to the chair NAC address
So the number
yesterday.
of your iPad should actually be the name on the email. So if you could probably give your number, that might be helpful.
Okay.
Did you
Number
send it-
40.
Did you send it at 4:11 PM yesterday?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay, so I have one on the email here. It has 4 recommendations?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually sent 2 separate emails.
Okay, so I have it, I think it's this one. NAC recommends the Census Bureau analyze and report on the data it collected on the fluidity and external classification rates. Is that yours?
So that's one of my
Okay,
emails.
I just want to make sure that this is yours.
Yes, it is.
Can I forward that to you? Did you not get that one, or? But let me look at the one, so you want me to read the one that's related to Mina, that you wrote up?
Sure. Or I think there was one, basically, I wrote a recommendation which basically suggested that the NAC express its support for what the Census Bureau has identified as its optimal question strategy coming out of the 2015 NCT. So that kind of 4-point strategy of MENA checkbox, combined question, and the points on technology, and terminology.
Okay.
And I support Ann's recommendations.
All right, I'm just looking for, because I have more specific recommendations from you about reporting.
That's true.
patterns.
So I sent a separate email with just this one recommendation. I'll read it out, which says, the NAC supports the Bureau's selection of an optimal design for the 2020 Census Race Ethnicity item and recommends that this format be submitted to Congress in 2018 as the proposed question wording.
I found that one too, but it was from 4:01 p.m.
Sorry.
yesterday. That's okay. So, okay, I think we can, this one's pretty straightforward. The other 4 were a little bit longer. So do you guys want me to read this out to you? And I just emailed it to Tara, to Tara. So it is, I'll repeat it again. So it's the NAC supports the Bureau's selection of an optimal design for the 2020 Census Race Ethnicity item and recommends that this format be submitted to Congress in 2018 as the proposed question wording. Is that, so, hearing no objections, I'd like to move that we adopt this recommendation. Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or motions on this topic? I want to just thank Mike and Roberto and Nicholas for all your wonderful work. So thank you again.
Thank you, Ditas. Thank you, everyone, for all the feedback and the ongoing encouragement. We're going to keep talking, so stick with us. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, so we have a little bit of time, so I suggest we could take a quick break, but do come back right at 11:45 on the dot, because that's when we need to do the public comment.
And for those of you that submitted recommendations, we have a compiled list. Can we make sure that yours are on there with your names on it, just so it makes it easier? Thank you.